Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our weekly webcast with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and president of the Schiller Institute. Today is March 15th, the Ides of March. Now, there's a lot happening in Italy, speaking of the Ides of March and the Julius Caesar. The Italians have staked out a very strong position for working with China. Helga, you were there this week for a conference, a very significant conference with representation from the corporate sector in Italy, but also the government. And I think we should start there because this has caused a continuing panic among the unilateralists, the geopolitical forces of the European Union that are trying to keep China out. So what are the Italians doing? What's going on there?
Well, as you may know, there is a state visit coming up of President Xi Jinping in Italy on the 22nd and 23rd, so actually next week. And it has been leaked ahead of time that at the occasion of this state visit, the Italians will sign a memorandum of understanding with China to cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative. And that has caused a complete uproar. You had a huge freak out by the Financial Times. You had an intervention by a person called Garrett Marquis, who is somehow in the vicinity of Bolton around the White House, who basically said the Italians will have absolutely no benefit of this and it will ruin their image in the world for a very long time to come. So it came quite timely that we had this event in Milan, which was a co-sponsored event between Movisol, which is the Movimento Solidarietà, the Italian sister organization of the LaRouche movement, headed by Liliane Gorini, and the region of Lombardy, who co-sponsored this event. And so the subject was indeed the collaboration of Italy with the Belt and Road Initiative. The event was long planned ahead of time. So it's a pure coincidence that it occurred just in front of the before the state visit of Xi Jinping. So the first speaker of this occasion was Michele Geraci, who is the undersecretary, I think, of the economic ministry. And he is, he's a very knowledgeable person about China because he was there as a professor teaching for 10 years. And he is now the head of the task force on China of the Italian government. So he gave a presentation where he basically played down the uproar around this memorandum of understanding by basically saying it will not change anything. It will not change Italy's alliance with NATO nor the European Union. It just means that Italy will have more export opportunities in the fastest growing economic market in the world, which is China. And Italy is just trying to catch up with other European countries like Germany and France, who already have much more trade with China. So he gave a very, calm and optimistic picture how this will benefit the development of the ports, Trieste, Genoa, Palermo, and also infrastructure developments. And he said this will not mean to give anything away, like giving infrastructure away or so, because these are all new investments. The Chinese will build new docks in some of these parts, so it will be greenfield investments which will increase the productivity of the Italian economy, and there is actually no reason to be worried about it. So I think this was very informative, and well, then I gave the second speech where I basically, said it's actually in a larger context, because what is happening very clearly is that the Chinese government is trying to establish a new paradigm, which Xi Jinping always calls the community or the shared community of a joint future of humanity, or the community of destiny of the one mankind. And they are trying to build a new set of international relations, which basically, overcomes geopolitics. And I mentioned the fact that, there in history, there were 16 cases where the secondary power would rise and bypass the, up to that point, dominant power. And that in 12 cases, it led to war. And that in 4 cases, it just meant that the second power would take the place of the first power and bypass it without war. And I emphasize the fact that the Chinese government, and especially Xi Jinping, have made very clear many times that it is not the intention to replace the United States in a dominant role in the world. And they naturally also don't want to have a war, but that they offer a completely new way of relating to each other based on the respect for the sovereignty of the other, the difference of the social system, and just cooperate on a win-win basis. And, I said that it's really funny because, when Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, in September in Kazakhstan, for about 4 years, this largest infrastructure program in history developed very quickly. And now there are, I think, 112 countries who have different degrees of cooperation, and another 30 or 40 international institutions. And for about 4 weeks, the Western media and the major think tanks, did not mention much at all, basically neglecting or pretending this largest infrastructure project in history was not there. And then after approximately 4 years, in an obvious coordinated way, all the media and all the think tanks all of a sudden started an attack on China, as basically saying this is just Chinese imperialism. They're trying to get the countries into the debt trap. They are authoritarian system. And, in a certain sense, it's very clear this is the geopolitical reflex reacting to the fact that the world is clearly very quickly changing, and that the power center has already shifted to Asia, with China taking a leading role in this development. So I think that, the obvious solution to this crisis, and then one big accusation naturally is also that China is splitting Europe, dividing Europe. I mean, actually, there are already 13 countries who have signed MOUs with China, and Italy will be the first G7 country, which is why they are so absolutely nervous about it, because, obviously, this is the third largest economy on the continent, or even on the continent. So, I mean, obviously, the solution, I made strongly the point that it did not need China to divide Europe. The European Union is divided all by itself. Look at the division between the North and the South because of the brutal austerity policy of the EU Commission, which completely impoverished Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and there's a clear division on that point, and another one on the migrant issue, which is a clear divide between Eastern and Western Europe. And in a matter of fact, China has made many times the argument, and I fully agree, that the Belt and Road Initiative and the cooperation with that is actually the way to unite Europe, provided that, let's say, France and Germany would recognize that it also means tremendous business opportunity for them to join. If all these European countries would basically say it is in our best interest to cooperate not only in multilateral trade and investment agreements in the Eurasian continent, but especially to develop Africa together as the only human way to deal with the refugee crisis, it could lead to a very good development. But the EU will have a summit on this subject on the 21st of March, and they have already put out a 10-point action plan. Basically, it's clearly an effort to counter this influence of China. And then they will have an EU-China summit at the beginning of April. And it's very clear that the EU Commission is very much on a different course than Italy. But let's see. I think the visit of Xi Jinping will be successful, and it will show new ways for everybody how it is in everybody's best interest to cooperate.
Before we move on from this, I have a question that is brought up all the time that you were just alluding to. Given the obvious benefits of trading with China and the fact that there are German cities, localities, Hamburg, Duisburg, there are French agreements, there's motion in Scandinavia and Greece and Italy. Given that, and the European economies have stalled and are on a downward track, why would the EU be so insistent that you cannot have these agreements?
Well, it's funny, because it is the same neoliberal ideology or circles, which were the ones who were pushing very hard in 2001 for China to join the WTO. And with that, there was obviously the hope and the conviction that all you had to do is get China into the WTO, and then sooner or later they would adopt the so-called Western model of liberal democracy. And then basically what Fukuyama at one point after the collapse of the Soviet Union had said, that the Western model of democracy will take over everywhere in the world, and then that's the end of history. Well, I mean, obviously China did not go for the Western liberal model. They adopted economic policies which were based very much on the basis of what you could call the American system of economy of Alexander Hamilton, of Friedrich List, who is actually the most famous foreign economist in China. And naturally with Deng Xiaoping, they totally went in the opposite direction of the Cultural Revolution. And in the 40 years of opening up, they went into the direction of a very strong economic model, alleviating poverty almost entirely. They will have done that by next year. They have lifted 800 million people out of poverty and have the biggest economic miracle one can imagine. If you go to China these days, it is absolutely breathtaking. They have the most modern railway system. They are leading in fusion research. They are probably the leading space power by now. And obviously they had an extremely successful economic model, but they did not go for Western liberal democracy. And, they stuck to their Confucian tradition. They clearly have a planned economy to a large extent, even if they have increasingly free market components of that. So, but they did not go for the liberal democracy model because they believe that the system of meritocracy is much superior. And I must say, if you look at the results, there is no question that they are successful. Now, the Western liberal model, as you can see, especially as it developed after the Maastricht Agreement in '92, you have a complete policy in favor of the banks and speculation. The gap between rich and poor has widened. You have basically complete, disregard for the common good. And in the cultural field, while China is, basically trying to put emphasis on the aesthetical education of its population, I mean, that has been stated by Xi Jinping many times, because the aim of aesthetical education is a beautiful mind and a beautiful soul. And I wish that we had Western leaders who would say a thing like that. In the West, on the other side, I had a policy of everything is allowed, everything can go. You have the drug epidemic, you have the, demoralization of the youth. You have the really terribly degenerated youth culture. So, in a certain sense, now if the German Industry Association, the BDI, says there is a systemic competition or a competition of the systems, well, in a certain sense, it's true, but the West will lose that competition if we don't change the cultural direction in which we are going. So I think that the opposition of circuits like the European Union is because they don't want to give up, or they don't want to reflect on the fact that it is their own policies which have caused the Brexit, the election loss of Hillary Clinton, the emergence of the new Italian government, and the rise of so-called populism in many parts of Europe and actually the world, in the Western world. They are not willing to reflect on that it was the neoliberal policy which caused the discontent of the governed. And that is why they feel threatened. It's not that China is threatening them, because the Chinese policy has always not been proselytizing. If you look in the entire Chinese history, they have never proselytized their system, unlike the Christians or unlike the people who are preaching Western democracy to take over the planet. China, on the other side, has always said that they are perfectly happy if other cultures blossom and bloom. So the real competition is, or the fear is that the Western model does not want to reform, it does not want to look at its own faults, and therefore you have this really unbelievable hysteria.
What you just said, Helga, is fascinating when you look at the other side of this, which is on the other side of the Atlantic. President Trump is engaging in the trade talks with China. The progress is being made. Trump said again he thinks it's slow progress, but it's important. They're talking now about a summit with Xi Jinping possibly in April. And then at the same time, you have the same kind of line as you get from the European Union coming out from some officials in the Trump administration. Pompeo, when he released the State Department annual report on the human rights violations in China, made a big point saying that the Western system is superior, that Western free trade model allows freedom, whereas China is authoritarian. You have these lines coming out from Scaparroti, that the general in NATO, who is saying that the Chinese are going to use Huawei to tap into German communications, and therefore the United States may cut off intelligence sharing. This is really a fight between the EU and some of the governments in Europe, but it's also a battle within the American government.
Well, I think that there are many signs right now that also with 2020 coming closer, that there is a clear effort by the neocon elements in the Trump administration to rein Trump into their policies. I think that Trump right now, despite the fact that I think in the bottom of his heart, he definitely still wants to do what he promised, to improve relations with Russia, resolve the trade war with China. And I think on the Chinese case, it may actually hopefully work. Even so, I think many of the other environmental things, like, for example, that at the Hanoi summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un, the North Koreans just put out a statement that they may discontinue the process of denuclearization and talks with the United States, because at this Hanoi summit, Pompeo and Bolton would have created such an atmosphere of mistrust that it was not possible to continue, and that Kim Jong-un would soon come out with a statement. Now, I don't know if that will impact the trade negotiations, but I think that there are clearly some elements in the neocons who would rather not have the North Korea process succeed. And it's also clear that Trump promised in December to decrease the military budget, but the military budget increased. It's now 720 billion. It includes 500 million to counter the malicious intentions of Russia in Europe. It includes 33 million to counter the apparent or supposed military expansion of Russia and China, to which both the Russian and the Chinese governments have reacted very critical, saying this is all basically in the direction of confrontation. Then you have naturally the continued efforts by such people as Bolton, Pence, to go for regime change in Venezuela, which Trump also, he had said that he wants to end the policy of his previous the previous administrations of permanent warfare. But here they have basically created a situation where the United States is involved clearly in an attempt of regime change in Venezuela, which may not function because, the effort to give legitimacy to Maduro by trotting him around in different Latin American countries did not work. And now China has offered to rebuild the electricity grid. And the Venezuelan government is now asking the United Nations to investigate if the whole collapse of the energy grid was not sabotage. Now, this Venezuelan situation could be stabilized if China rebuilds the grid. And, it really needs urgently to be addressed because it has led to an unbelievable humanitarian crisis and refugee crisis. There are millions of refugees in the neighboring countries. Alone in the city of Lima, there is 1 million refugees in the streets. So I think that there is an effort by the neocons to rein Trump in. I think in the same light is also the absolute unbelievable going after Manafort and Roger Stone. I think there is a big upheaval in the legal community because in the case of Manafort, there is now a double jeopardy, in the cases they're trying to throw against him. But this is all designed to create an atmosphere of terror and, basically, rein Trump in. I don't know if it will succeed. I don't think so. He has successfully broken out in the past several times, but it definitely needs an intervention by the population, especially the Trump supporters, who have to understand the larger picture which is going on here.
And one other area where he is not giving in is on the so-called man-made climate change. They just announced that he will have a presidential committee on climate security headed up by Dr. Happer from Princeton. This is causing a total uproar among the people who are pushing this fraudulent Green New Deal. You have any thoughts on that, Helga?
Well, I think this is very important because obviously what President Trump wants to have happen is that the objective re-evaluation of the scientific basis of the so-called climate change is taking place, that the anthropocenic element of it is being reviewed as compared to, let's say, the cyclical developments of our galaxy or the basically the Milky Road in our galaxy and apparent and developments on the sun. So this is obviously extremely important because this occurs at a moment when there is this unbelievable campaign to cause children to go into a frenzy, with Greta Thunberg being proposed for the Nobel Prize, and she's being trotted around from UN conferences in Poland to Davos to, rallies. And, we have talked to some of these school children and they don't know the science of climate change. They're being induced with horror scenarios. Many of them say, why should I go to school and learn anything if the world ends in 12 years anyway? Or, one child even said, that she wanted to commit suicide in 13 years because, in 12 years, the world ends. This is a total misuse of children. And, the problem is, that many of the children do not have the intellectual cognitive ability even children of previous generations had, because there's just a study which came out in Germany which we can discuss at one of our next programs, because I think it's an extremely important study. What is the impact of the continuous many-hour per day use of digital devices, smartphones, laptops, iPads, on the neurological functions of the brain? That it does have the effect that people cannot make judgment, they don't have an historical sense, they don't have a sense of orientation. So, if you induce such fears where people think the world ends, I think this is one of the bigger crimes of the present time. And I can only hope that if there is such a presidential commission to look at, the whole climate change question in an objective way. I know that there are many scientists around the world who do not agree with the IPCC, and I can only hope that this will lead then to a re-establishment of a scientific approach in this whole matter.
And I think to conclude, we should take up this whole question then of how do you free the United States and the population from the fear of discussing these kinds of issues. Last week, we talked about the importance of the fight for the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche as a way of bringing into the open the kind of devious tactics and malicious intention of the people who ran the campaign against him, who are the very same networks that are running the campaign against Trump. And I think it's important, given the continuation of the rumors around the Mueller report coming out, the continued attacks from the House committee, the debate on should there be impeachment or not impeachment, that one thing that cuts through it or actually raises people above it is to look at the campaign that was run against your husband. And people can go to our website, should take a look at this, sign the petition to exonerate Lyndon LaRouche. We need to get momentum behind this. And Helga, I thought maybe you'd want to say something on this at the end of this program today.
Well, I think that it looks different depending if you look at it from inside the United States or from abroad. And, in the United States, you have a complete division between the Trump haters and the Trump supporters. I think that the people there should really understand that this apparatus, which is going after Trump, and it's just telling that Cheney just met with a whole bunch of Republicans, including Pence, behind closed doors in Georgia. And what leaked out was that he went after Trump because of his policy on Syria, supposedly because of NATO, and that he wouldn't listen to the intelligence community. Actually, you could say that this was an effort by, the war party, what to do to correct the policies of Trump. I mean, if you look at this, it's very clear that the forces which went after my husband in the 80s and the other colleagues of him, that this apparatus of William Weld, who wants to run against Trump, of Robert Mueller, and this entire, what some people call deep state, but which is actually much more interwoven with the British Empire, that this apparatus is right now the war party. These are the circles who are driving, the confrontation with Russia and China. And if they would succeed, I think you can kiss world peace goodbye, because we are still in an incredibly dangerous period of confrontation. So since this was the biggest injustice in the history of the United States, because if you look at the beautiful ideas which were generated by my husband, and if you go on our website, you can actually see some of the obituaries and some of the commemorations which were written by people around the world who appreciate the true worth of his ideas and his life work. And you contrast that with the outburst of hatred against these ideas, it shows you how absolutely important it is to exonerate my husband. And I think the best thing you can do to get the United States away from the confrontation with Russia and China to indeed make America great again, which would be, allowing Trump to do what his impulses are telling him in terms of, fixing the American economy, but especially, adopting the kinds of policies which would really remedy the international financial crisis and, go in the direction of a new paradigm. The best way to cause that to happen, and maybe the only way, is to contribute to the campaign to exonerate my husband. And I'm appealing to you to do exactly that.
And you can get a copy of the exoneration petition on the Schiller Institute website and read it, think about it, and talk to others. This is the fight to save the nation. So Helga, thanks for joining us, and welcome back from your trip to Italy. And we'll see what happens. It's going to be another interesting week ahead of us.
For sure. Till next week.
Bye.